Merci beaucoup, Alison Tay, donc de la Confédération syndicale internationale. Très très bonne intervention de nouveau et à nouveau je ne peux que vous encourager à aller lire l'excellent rapport qui a été sorti dont Yorgos je pense a mis les références et le rapport du PSI aussi est vraiment excellent. Tout ça se trouve dans le chat. Il nous reste 25 minutes environ pour aborder des questions qui ont été posées. Il y en a eu beaucoup qui portent plus à débat. Donc, il y a eu assez peu de questions vraiment de clarification, de compréhension. Par contre, il y a eu pas mal de remarques qui invitent à une discussion peut-être plus de fond. Je m'excuse à l'avance, il y a eu beaucoup de questions, notamment certaines assez techniques. Je ne pense pas qu'on pourra toutes les traiter ici. On a essayé de synthétiser, de voir aussi lesquelles revenaient le plus et d'essayer de grouper un petit peu. Il y en a trois qui paraissent vraiment essentielles. On va commencer par la première et je me tournerai d'abord vers Déborah pour avoir sa réponse. J'en ai déjà touché un mot, c'est lié essentiellement à l'intervention de M. Scholz et à une position qu'il a défendue qui consiste à dire il n'y a pas de règle pour l'instant, donc peut-être qu'il vaut mieux en avoir et en négocier dans une instance où on peut essayer d'avoir un impact positif, c'est-à-dire l'OMC, que de continuer à vivre dans un espèce de no man's land qui serait finalement pire que ce qu'on pourrait éventuellement essayer d'obtenir dans le cadre de l'OMC, même en sachant que ce cadre-là n'est pas idéal. Donc je voudrais avoir vos réactions là-dessus, en commençant par toi, Déborah. Est-ce qu'il vaut mieux effectivement participer à ces règles-là et essayer d'en obtenir le minimum, ou est-ce qu'il faut au contraire les boycotter dans leur ensemble? Mais alors, est-ce qu'on ne prend pas le risque d'être soumis à la situation actuelle, qui est une situation largement de non-droit? Je te cède la parole, Déborah.
Thank you. Let me put myself back in the off mode. Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, Allison, for that wonderful presentation of what really is an excellent report. So I hope folks do take a second to check those out that Yorgos is posting. On this question, so we really need to understand that WTO rules are not the same kind of, when we think of rules meaning regulation, WTO rules are more like anti-rules. The types of rules that you get, as I explained, would ban governments from being able to regulate and give corporations rights. And so this would be very, problematic. I mean, if we look at, shouldn't we have rules? Yes, I'm sure, a lot of people in this chat right now would say, we need to have stronger pro-competition rules, antitrust rules, okay? Because you have a situation right now, for example, where Amazon is the platform in which lots of small businesses market their products. But Amazon is also a player in that market. That doesn't exist in other sectors. You only have that in digital e-commerce. And it's not allowed in other sectors, because what happens then, Amazon uses the data that it collects about all of those MSMEs, all those small businesses that are marketing their products on Amazon's platform. Amazon has that data, and it uses it to compete with those small businesses, okay? Now a corporation has lied to its small business users, to its consumers, and to regulators for years about this. But there was just recently, a few weeks ago, an expose in a very pro-business paper demonstrating that this was actually the case, and they're putting lots of small businesses out of business. So you get this idea, oh, well, all you need to do is hook up your small business on Amazon, you'll be raking in the money. E-commerce is so great. Well, let's have a situation where we have a platform, but couldn't it be run as a cooperative? Couldn't it be run just in a different way, that it's not a monopolistic power that is using that data, also, setting the rules under which it's organized? So we need to have more government regulation of that sector. I mean, another one that's really obvious is tax policy. These corporations fight tooth and nail in every international agency and instance in which governments from around the world are trying to come up with some sort of coherent regulations on tax policy, both for regulating online transactions, to say if you buy something, on eBay or on Amazon, should there be taxes? Should there be tariffs on downloading music, for example, that puts, American products at a great advantage over local products and has a big cultural implications as well. But also for taxing their profits. This is something that OECD has been trying for years to come to some conclusion on, and these big corporations, have been blocking it. They don't want to pay taxes. This is not rocket science that they don't want to pay taxes. They want to enshrine. That's the kind of rule that's being discussed in the WTO, is handcuffing governments from taxing them. You can't get, the tax rules are discussed somewhere else. So this is part of the issue, is that most of these issues are already dealt with by other international agencies that have competence over a wide variety of issues, that have to look at multiple stakeholders, that look at the public, that look at the consumers, that look at the trade union perspective, that have technical experts, engineers at the table, okay? There already exist agreements on e-contracts and e-signatures in the International Telecommunications Union, okay? And even the United States will often say, well, I don't like those, because they're not multi-stakeholder enough. And then they want to push in the WTO. Trade unions are not allowed in the WTO. Civil society is not allowed in the WTO, okay? Only business. Business is there every day they have these negotiations. So it's really important to know that the business community, the big tech lobbyists are coordinated with the hosts of the negotiations. And every day that there are negotiations in the WTO gives the same room where the negotiations are happening during the lunch break to the business lobby, to invite big corporations and sometimes little MSME, being there as puppets, to say why they want a specific rule and why something like, say, localization of data is absolutely terrible for you. And so this is very coordinated. So you look at antitrust, you look at tax, we could have a lot more labor rights in digital, digitization and technology. Allison just gave the tippy top of the iceberg, and she was very, pretty comprehensive of a lot of issues, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of the labor issues that could be adjudicated. We could have all kinds of stuff on consumer rights. We could have technical standards that would improve safety and security, for example, of e-transactions. That can't happen in the WTO. It's not fit for that purpose. WTO's thing is always to decrease regulation of trade, except when it comes to patent monopolies, where it increases regulations and burdens on government, okay? So it's really clear that these cannot happen in the WTO. If they could, it would be worth taking a look at, okay? I'm not so knee-jerk, anti that I wouldn't say, hey, if we could get some important things here, fight against censorship in Russia with with freedom of information, or enshrine net neutrality. These are really important issues. But, and I'm just using Russia as a cipher, please. But you can't get that in the WTO. It doesn't function like that. That's not its raison d'etre. So don't think that you can have not to mention, if you get one little positive, best practice, it's going to be incredibly overwhelmed by this tsunami of negative implications that really have at its core handcuffing regulation. I mean, just think about the fact these come from big tech, right? I mean, that's who invented the rules. And so you have a situation now where the EU has its mandate, and Australia has a mandate, and Japan has a mandate, and then there's some developing countries participating, okay? But what developing countries have been talking about, this whole discussion about decreasing the digital divide and getting more access to technology and being able to get more of their people online and having more infrastructure, none of that can be solved by the WTO, because that's not the institution, that's not what it does. And so anything good that you want to come out of regulating the internet is going to come out in other spaces. And by definition, it's going to come out in spaces where civil society and labor are participating, because we are the ones representing people's interests. And spaces where only corporations have access, and not only have access, where they invented the game, that playing field is going to be defined by the contours of what the corporations want. And the best outcome you can have is flexibility for a few years of implementing some of the terrible rules. That's what they call a development outcome in the WTO, is when developing countries gain the flexibility for a certain number of years to implement bad rules. So that's not the kind of outcome we could go for. And we could spend a lot of time talking about what are the rules we need to have data in the public interest? What are the rules we need for digital industrialization? What are the rules we need to have a fair digitalization that benefits workers, where we have shared prosperity and full employment as a result of digitalization that could be wonderful. The world could be a much better place, but it's not going to happen if these rules are cemented as proposed all of these development opportunities for all countries around the world are really going to be incredibly constrained because that is their goal. I'll stop there.
Merci beaucoup, Déborah, pour une réponse très, très complète. J'ai vu que Alison, tu acquiesçais, tu avais l'air assez d'accord, à moins que tu aies quelque chose à rajouter. Est-ce qu'on passe à la question suivante puisque le temps file, d'accord. Mais je vais enchaîner avec la question suivante que je t'inviterai alors à répondre en premier, Alison. C'est une autre question qui est assez importante, qui a été très peu abordée. C'est la question environnementale, en fait. On n'en a pas parlé, pour ainsi dire, jusqu'à maintenant. Or, il y a eu 2-3 questions qui ont été soulevées à cet égard. Vous avez beaucoup parlé de la nécessité d'avoir des règles qui soient favorables aux travailleurs, qui soient favorables aux citoyens, qui soient favorables aux pays du Sud, en expliquant souvent qu'il ne s'agit pas tellement d'être contre les technologies, mais plutôt d'être contre leur utilisation actuelle qui ne bénéficie qu'à une poignée de multinationales. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas quand même la place là-dedans pour une critique quand même de la technologie elle-même, notamment du point de vue de ses conséquences environnementales? Et comment est-ce qu'on intègre alors une réflexion sur les limites qu'il faut poser à la technologie, notamment pour des raisons environnementales, y compris lorsqu'on parle de 5G, par exemple? Est-ce que la 5G est un développement raisonnable pour les évolutions qu'elle va permettre dans le monde du travail, d'un point de vue économique, etc., mais aussi pour ses conséquences environnementales? Et donc, comment est-ce que vous pensez à cette articulation-là et comment est-ce que vous la pensez, cette articulation entre les impératifs écologiques et le reste des combats que vous menez? Alors, Alison, dans ton cas, pour les droits des travailleurs, Déborah, dans ton cas, dans une perspective plus internationale. Voilà, je te propose, Alison, de commencer et alors ensuite, si Déborah veut compléter, on lui passera la parole aussi.
So thank you for whoever asked this question, because it's fundamental. It's absolutely critical to address access to environmental technology for all. And that needs to be led by public and common interest principles. So I'm not going to go into 5G, actually, because I'm not an expert on that. But again, who will benefit from it is the real question. And I think the reality for addressing governance gaps around e-commerce is that so much of what we need and know needs to be transferred to the global south is not going to be on ships or in cartons anymore. It's actually in terms of electronic transmissions, access to data, and access to good data, and access to collecting and collating and owning their own data. So there's a question for environmental protection in every country, but there's a massive inequality in terms of access to technology, research and development, and the intellectual property rights and standards around transfer of technologies. And that needs to be taken into account in public interest terms, not only in terms of where very often public investment into university development or innovative technologies is publicly funded, publicly owned in many cases, and then the profits are privatized. The socialization of risk, and yet the privatization rather of profits, is again the model that applies. So it's in some senses no different to many of the other restrictions that Deborah spoke about in terms of government public policy setting capacity. And so for the union movement, we know both the intention for the industrial transformation that is necessary to address inequality and poverty to ensure real sustainable development is a pillar that is as connected to labor rights and standards as it is to environmental standards and rights.
Merci beaucoup, Alison. Je me tourne vers Déborah. Est-ce que tu veux ajouter quelque chose sur cette question-là de l'inclusion de la question environnementale dans tout le débat et les réflexions qu'on a ici sur les règles qui entourent le e-commerce?
I think I would just add to Alison's excellent comments that, you know, when we think about the actual aspect of e-commerce, aside from the 27 other issues surrounding digitalization that corporations have put in the basket of digital trade, you know, we're really talking about just using the internet to buy things online. And when we talk about, you know, trade in general, obviously there are huge environmental impacts to the trading and shipping industry when we have things like, you know, products that are raw materials from one country shipped to another country for some processing, shipped to another country for further processing, shipped to another country for distribution. That may have certain efficiencies in terms of mostly saving labor costs. That's what they're talking about with efficiencies, and regulatory arbitrage. So trying to, you know, do your tax avoidance and have production in countries, say, that don't regulate mining or something like that. But that is, you know, sort of a bigger issue for trade in general. And you can have certain aspects of e-commerce that might be less energy intensive. Say it might be less energy intensive for you to use your computer to go shopping than you to drive your car to a shopping mall or something like that. This has not been studied extensively, to be honest, because there are other ways that e-commerce is actually more energy intensive. And there is more and more data, for those of you who know this industry, coming out about the huge energy suckingness of the cloud and the immense amount of data that's being held on the cloud, and the fact that there is no proper regulation of the energy intensivity of data intensive industries. And so this is something we're going to have to look at. But what I would posit in that, because there isn't a lot of data to say, you know, e-commerce is more, I mean, people will make anecdotal claims, you know, it's fine. But actual data to show, are we consuming less energy because e-commerce has increased? I don't think so. The real issue is, shouldn't we be, you know, embedded in that question is, shouldn't we be able to meet our human needs for products, goods, and services in a way that doesn't destroy our shared home of the earth? And what you just did then is put a question in which the environment is more important than the commercial concerns of corporations. That's inherent in the question. And that is exactly the kind of thinking that we need, in terms of saying, we need to not just say, stick a sustainability chapter on a terribly written agreement that is going to destroy the environment, but let's have a little blue ribbon commission to look at some implications and then put a little provision on the side. No, what is the whole implication of the whole thing going to be on sustainability on planet Earth? And that is more the type of question that I think we need to be asking. These have not largely been asked or answered in e-commerce, except for some people who try to say that it's more environmentally friendly to buy things online. But I think in terms of, does it then produce, you know, result in more small packages? What is the impact of more small packages, people buying them rather than container shipping? This could be terribly inefficient. The use of the computers, everything. So it's just that gets to the idea of, we should be looking at how technology can increase our sustainability and decrease our exploitation of fossil fuels and our destruction of the environment, not just rules to make big tech more money exploiting our planet.
Merci beaucoup à toutes les deux pour vos réponses. Mais je propose d'en prendre donc une troisième qui va peut-être nous amener sur un terrain un peu plus concret. C'est un peu la question de qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire. Alors, elle s'est déclinée sous différents angles, mais essentiellement, qu'est-ce que les gouvernements peuvent faire et qu'est-ce que nous, en tant que membres de la société civile, notamment syndicale, mais ou autres, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? Donc, qu'est-ce que les gouvernements peuvent faire pour essayer de commencer à réaffirmer leur capacité de régulation, notamment vis-à-vis de ces grandes entreprises? Il y avait une question notamment qui tournait autour du concept de souveraineté numérique. Est-ce qu'il faudrait intégrer cette notion-là dans les accords de commerce, par exemple? Donc ça, c'est un premier élément. Et par ailleurs, du point de vue de nous, en tant que citoyens, syndicalistes, membres de la société civile, quels sont nos leviers d'action vis-à-vis de ce type de négociation et plus largement vis-à-vis de ce commerce qui se situe à une échelle quand même extrêmement lointaine. Et donc, voilà, si vous pouvez répondre à ces deux questions-là, et peut-être sur la question de qu'est-ce que nous, on peut faire en tant qu'activistes, donner un peu des exemples d'actions qui sont déjà en cours ou qui sont sur le point d'intervenir et qu'on pourrait éventuellement rejoindre ou relayer, etc. Je propose peut-être à Alison de commencer et puis on terminera alors avec Déborah.
Thank you. Again, great questions, because we're not here just to listen and talk, right? We're here to actually plan strategies that are going to make a difference and use our agency to change the world. That's why I'm here tonight. And I really thank Deborah for outlining some of the key points, because what we know is we are trying to build, not rebuild, sorry, we are trying to build a new economy ourselves. And that takes everybody. And we don't want to just make the evil empire or the evil actors bad guys. We actually need to have everybody participate in refining and redefining what it is that society demands as purposeful businesses, including digital platform companies. So there is a real demand on governments to reaffirm their capacity to regulate. And we would say, stop the negotiations at the WTO. Not we would say, we have said that. Both the International Trade Union Confederation, the European Trade Union Confederation, and many of the other global federations that Deborah spoke of at the beginning. But we would see that we actually need a new convention or a new international organization, something like the International Labour Organization, which is based on stakeholder engagement, not just governments speaking with each other. So the ILO was established actually 101 years ago to address social justice, not only employment regulations and international labour standards, but that brings together, unique in the UN system, a body that has employers, workers' representatives, us as the union movement, and governments with the responsibility and the mandate to ensure regulations on labour. Now, what we really need is a space where tripartism, in that sense, along with civil society, to dynamically put standards on data collection and data use at the heart of these discussions. Not to think that they're a marginal issue or they'll be dealt with by someone else, or they can just stay in the grey zone. No, what we really need is a space for ensuring that not only in a regulatory and governance sense, and that's what I'm addressing first, but also in an economic building sense, that the economic and social policies, the environmental policies, the issues around labour standards are taken into account in both what kinds of businesses access government funding, for example, are able to take advantage of government procurement provisions, are access to bailout or recovery funds in a COVID-19 recovery world. We need to ensure that there's coherence across the accountabilities of government, and indeed for trade unions and civil society actors, indeed for all of us as citizens, to demand that. So we also see, outside of the other issues that Deborah mentioned about competition policy needing to be really overhauled at national level and at a global level, to have a framework for that. Absolutely, that tax rules need to be fundamental to the foundation of an economy that works for everybody. So not only the collection of public revenues, but redistribution mechanisms, because that also comes with the power of monopoly capitalism, if you like, of big tech companies that really dominate the markets, as Deborah so beautifully explained to us tonight. So I think the leverage for us is both in terms of looking at the space for rule making and the public policy settings that we demand of governments, and indeed accountability of corporations. So in the EU, this is outside of the things we've talked about tonight, but the Director General of Justice announced a couple of weeks ago that in a human and trade union, in a human business and human rights agenda around responsible business conduct, that the EU will bring into place mandatory due diligence for companies in the EU. Now that is something, also a technical discussion that very often it's the lawyers and the human rights community understands better. But those who are active on trade need to take this into account. Mandatory due diligence, whereby companies must look at their risks to violating or undermining human rights, including labor rights and indeed environmental standards. And not only have an approach that takes that into account, but actually brings together mechanisms in their own operations and across supply chains where they source from to ensure that fundamental human rights standards are actually upheld and not undermined. So the reality of that is, what does it mean in terms of grievance mechanisms, in terms of remedy, and indeed in terms of having a complaints mechanism for citizens, for workers and communities impacted adversely by human rights impacts, including access to right to information, to use our own data. And we need to therefore join the dots between our human rights obligations that are currently very strongly upheld in the EU, and the rest of the world is looking to the EU's leadership around mandatory due diligence. We need to actually ensure that that's a global conversation and that that is driven in many legal jurisdictions to impact the role and impact of businesses, including e-commerce operations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Alison. On a déjà un petit peu débordé, donc je vais laisser le mot de la fin à Déborah pour compléter aussi sur cette question-là en quelques minutes. Et puis je conclurai pour quand même pas aller trop loin au-delà du délai, notamment pour les traductrices qui doivent commencer à fatiguer un petit peu. Donc Déborah, à toi la parole pour encore quelques minutes et puis on conclura cette conférence. Merci.
Thank you so much. So yes, really quick, Alison covered some great stuff. I would say on the national level that people really need to make sure that their elected officials know what their position is on this. As Mr. Schultz said, you know, the mandate is set by the commission, by the council, and then goes to the commission. But you know, there is a time when governments have to vote on ratification, and that is way too late to be influencing the process. They need letters from you. You know, has there been in your country a campaign to have a sign-on letter of all of the different civil society and trade union groups and consumer protection and citizen to say, hey, this is not in our interest. This is a big corporate tech lobby from US. Nobody likes these guys anymore. You know, it's very different. We started this work 5 years ago and everybody loved Facebook. Everybody loved Amazon and Google. Now people are seeing how pernicious and rapacious these corporations are, and they're saying, woo, we need to dial back their power. So you can get a lot more juice, a lot more interest from saying, hey, let's have a national, you know, sort of statement saying that this isn't the way to go. And let's not get fooled by this, like, well, some are good and some bad kind of thing when we're talking about this wholly terrible corporate agenda. So your national legislators need to hear from you, but your local governments do too, because their jurisdiction is being traded away in the guise of increasing efficiency in the digital marketplace. And we'll never forget that it was Wallonia, if I'm right, that stood up to the EU in CETA, in the fight against CETA, if I remember right, and said this isn't in our interest. So we need the local government, I mean, Wallonia is not a local government, but the regional, we need all levels of government to understand what the implications are, because no matter, you know, what jurisdiction or competence they have, something that they work on is being affected by these rules. We also need to develop the alternatives, and that's why it's so important to have trade unions at the table, because the trade unions understand how the technology is being deployed in the workplace, and the trade unions understand how to make sure that the technology can actually benefit people in its rolling out in a business setting. And so that's why it's so important that these issues, for example, are part of collective bargaining agreements, that the decision over how tech is going to be enrolled is part of a collective bargaining agreement, and that unions have say in the matter of how technology is going to be deployed in the workplace, because they do stand up for the right thing when you have corporations that are doing surveillance capitalism, really illegal, negative type of facial recognition, and the workers say no, that benefits everybody. That's been one of the most important aspects, I think, of pushing back against some of this negative implications, is that the workers themselves don't want to be part of that. But they also, you know, need to be there for their own selves and to make sure that technology does is rolled out in a way that promotes shared prosperity and good jobs for all. Now, that's also for public services. It's also, if you think about smart cities, is there things happening with smart cities in your city? Is there more surveillance? Is there more, lots of technology being used in these corporate contracts, which is a privatization of public services? And how is that data being used? So there's all kinds of real fights that are happening at the local level that you can get involved in that involve the rolling back of this power. But it's really about, saying, how are we going to use the technology for the good of all economically, but also to just improve our quality of life through our public services. I would say there's a lot to do with the media. The media don't know anything about these issues. And when I talk to trade reporters or to reporters that understand digitalization really well, there are thousands and thousands of reporters who understand technology, and they say, oh, trade is really complicated, I can't. And so you have to educate them. And that's why I start by talking about the business model, because everybody understands that, instead of talking about the technical things that are on trade. And then you have to get into what those provisions are. So there's a lot of media work that can be done. I think there's a lot of other work in terms of public education. I really appreciate CETRI and the organizations that are hosting this evening, Gracea. It's a wonderful pleasure. It's great to meet other people like you all who care about these issues, who want to know more. Please go to our website. It's pretty terrible. I have to admit, ourworldisnotforsale.net. It's pretty terrible, but there's a lot of really good information, and the French section is not that big, so you don't get lost. Thank you so much. And if anybody is interested in being in touch, my email address is djames, DJAMES, @cepr.net. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Déborah. Voilà, on va s'arrêter ici. Malheureusement, il y aurait encore beaucoup à dire, évidemment, et on pourra dire encore beaucoup à d'autres occasions. On va s'arrêter là pour aujourd'hui. Encore un immense merci, en tout cas, aux 3 intervenants et aux 2 intervenantes qui sont encore là ici ce soir pour leur présentation qui était vraiment éclairante et voilà, qui, je pense, ont permis de faire le tour quand même de pas mal d'enjeux. Merci beaucoup aussi aux participants. Encore une fois, désolé de ne pas avoir pu relayer toutes les questions. Mais il y avait des commentaires et des remarques très très pertinentes sur le fil de discussion à côté, et j'espère qu'on a quand même pu adresser une ou deux des grosses questions qui sont revenues un petit peu plus souvent. Merci aux interprètes évidemment qui ont fait un boulot fantastique pendant ces 2 heures, merci beaucoup. Merci à Seb et à Anne pour l'aide technique. Donc effectivement, si vous voulez continuer de suivre un petit peu les questions liées au commerce électronique en général et en particulier sur ces négociations à l'OMC, vous pouvez déjà participer au webinaire de la CSI qui aura lieu le 1er juillet. Donc toutes les informations ont été communiquées ici dans le chat. C'est sur inscription par contre, donc il faut soit envoyer un mail à Yorgos pour qu'il vous envoie un lien pour vous inscrire, soit trouver un moyen de le faire. Par ailleurs, effectivement, je vous invite chaudement à vous rendre sur le site de Our World is Not for Sale qui fourmille d'informations depuis 2017 sur cette question-là en particulier et sur beaucoup d'autres dans les 3 langues, enfin dans 3 langues en tout cas, en anglais, en espagnol et en français. Donc il y a vraiment énormément de textes, y compris des textes assez courts qui synthétisent vraiment les principaux enjeux et qui peuvent être très utiles après de remobiliser pour des interpellations de politiciens ou de journalistes. Donc allez-y. Et vous pouvez vous rendre aussi sur le site du CETRI et du Gracea, effectivement, où on essaye aussi de suivre et de relayer au maximum d'informations sur ces questions-là. Voilà, je précise aussi qu'on a enregistré ici la conférence, donc normalement on en tirera des petites capsules si les intervenants nous donnent leur accord, je leur demanderai quand même avant par mail, mais a priori on aura possibilité de se repasser au moins les 3 interventions de 20 minutes avec sous-titres pour pouvoir diffuser aussi aux personnes qui n'ont pas pu nous rejoindre aujourd'hui. Et donc je m'arrête là, encore un tout grand merci à tous et une bonne fin de journée, et en espérant vous recroiser à l'occasion autour de cette question ou d'autres. Merci beaucoup.